Hi, everybody. Welcome to WAD webinar. I hope you're all doing well down, but hopefully everything is going to go back to normal quite soon. Today we have a very special speaker, and this gentleman managed to trick the lie detector in front of me, so be careful with him. And we are really lucky that today he agreed to share with us his knowledge in this sphere. And let me connect him. Great. So I hope you really enjoy this webinar. And now I pass the word to Stephen Komorek from Conflict International. Stephen, please unmute yourself.
Hello, everybody. How is everyone doing today? I appreciate you all joining us for this webinar series. Now, there will be a certificate that's given with this, as this is an accredited course at the end of the webinar. So if you stay through the whole, you'll actually get 1 CEU for attending this course. So I hope everyone's doing well today, and I know that we are all in different time zones, so I appreciate everybody joining in. I know it's late for some people there, and I know it's during the day for others, so I just greatly appreciate everybody here. We're going to go ahead and get started. Now, what this is and what this is not. With this course, I'm going to give you guys a pretty good overview of what it means to be a human lie detector, how it works, and give you some tips on what you can do. Now, this is actually a 4 to 5 day course, depending. We also have 3-day workshops with it. So I've condensed the material down for you, but hopefully you all will enjoy what you have, and we will have a question and answer at the end as well. Now we're going to start by going ahead and sharing the screen here. Now, with this course, what we have here is, go ahead and you have human lie detection. Now, I titled this for the WAD webinar, The Truth in Lies and Deceptions. Now, it's kind of a misnomer in the name there, right? How can you have truth in lies and deceptions? Well, we're going to get into that, and I'm going to go over some things that you can do, some knowledge and nuggets of joy that you can have outside this webinar when you're completed it. Maybe things you didn't pick up on before, right? So you might be able to take this hour here, this little training lecture, and take something out of it that you can actually put to use in your everyday life. I appreciate all you guys joining in. Let's go ahead and get started. I just wanted to say welcome. I know we have people here from all over the world attending, and I'm just very blessed and happy that all you guys are here to join us. And so with the list of the countries that we have, I just wanted to say welcome to you in your own language. Now, who am I? Well, right now I'm very honored and privileged to serve as the Sergeant at Arms for the WAD. I've been serving as the Sergeant at Arms for the past 3 consecutive presidents. I'm the U.S. Operations Director for Conflict International. And I'm a senior instructor and faculty member at the World Institute for Security Enhancement, WISE, which is a 35-year-old training institute. Now, in the private sector, I'm certified as a lie detection expert instructor in the body language assessment and scoring technique. Now, in my career in both military and government, I've had additional training, but we're going to focus on what's here in the private sector. Now, I've taught numerous classes to law enforcement, private investigators, law firms, military personnel. In 2019, I was awarded the title of Master Trainer of Lie Detection by Doug Wheatstone. On that certificate of achievement, that it states, in recognition of scholarly attainment, distinguished service, and on nomination of the faculty of the body language and scoring technique. Now with this, Doug Wheatstone created the body language and scoring technique. Now he has done this and taught it all over the world and multiple different agencies. He's a member of the intelligence community here in the United States. And as you can see from what he posts publicly on his public bio, which is listed there, a number of different agencies, part of the White House team. So he has developed this program. There's also many other programs out there. There's the read technique. There's the scan technique for witness interviews. There's a number of different techniques, but here I'm going to focus on one of the ones I like the best and combined a lot of different things into it, the BLAST technique, the body language assessment and scoring technique. Now, what is human lie detection, right? I mean, we hear that, and it sounds really cool, but what is it? I think that maybe a more accurate wording for it would be human deception detection. Now, with that, I like this term a lot better, right? Because everybody lies. Everybody lies, and we're going to get into that. We're going to get into some facts. We're going to get into some numbers as well with it. But I believe that human deception detection is a much better term that I feel more comfortable with, because what you're really doing, you're not telling anybody, is this person lying? What you're doing is you're stating, are they being deceptive? And then how are they being deceptive? And one of the great terms that a lot of people in the industry like to do as a follow-up question is, what else? Well, one of the things that we can do with being deception experts is we can look into those deceptions, and we can ask ourselves and find out why this person is being deceptive. So we can ask those great questions like, what else? Now, the ability to identify deception without the use of technology. Now, that's key here in our description. And the reason why is there are a number of different other things you can do out there. You can have polygraphs, and we're going to get into a lot of these very briefly, some of the other categories and different techniques that you can do with equipment. But this is specifically without any equipment, just you, your tradecraft, your skill set, no equipment. Now, we wonder, how often do people lie, right? Because everybody lies. One of the ways I start this off when I held my classes, I ask a question. I say, hey, raise your hand if you ever told a lie. And then, of course, everybody raises their hand. And you say, raise your hand if you're a liar. And people raise their hand. And the people who don't raise their hand, I say, hey, everyone who raised your hand, look at the people who haven't raised your hand. Guess what? We're all liars. Now, there are numbers that go with that. Men generally lie more than women. Men lie between 3 to 8 times a day, and women technically lie between 1 to 5 times a day. Now, there's the age group that goes in that teenage girls lie most. And that's due to things along the lines of peer pressure, expectations, and they typically lie between 3 to 10 times a day. Now, we find out that the University of Massachusetts had a study, and they found out something very, very interesting, that lying is a reflexive trait of humans. Let's think about that for a minute. What does that mean exactly? It's a reflexive trait of humans. That means it's a naturally occurring thing. If you have children, nieces, nephews, you've been around kids lie. And they say before, I think it's, the age of 5 and 6, they don't really understand. When they're these toddlers, right? They tell it, but they're not cognizant that they're actually lying. And that went into that study and shows that it's a reflexive trait. So it's a naturally occurring thing. And about 60% of people lie during a 10-minute conversation. That's telling an average of 2.92 lies. There are other studies that reveal different measurements and different numbers in that. But the big numbers come when we look at the average span of a lifetime, right? The average person lies 88,000 times throughout a lifetime, which is about 4 times a day or 1,460 times a year. Now, there are different ratios and numbers on this depending on which study you're looking at, what their baseline was. We get the gist. And the bottom line of all of this is everybody lies. What's interesting is the most common lie that people tell. And remember how at the beginning of this, I said I like the word deception better than lie, being able to tell that deception. Because the most common lie or deception is, I'm fine. Now, how many times have we heard that? We've all heard it. What's interesting is we had some numbers come out there. One of those things here that we found was that 40% of all people lie on their resume. And again, with these numbers, there are different studies that go to and from. We also have 90% of people have lied on a dating site at least once. Now, those would be people who have been on dating sites. 86% of people regularly lie to their parents. 75% lie to their friends. 73% people lie to their siblings. 69% people regularly lie to your spouse. And one of those things could be, no, you don't look fat in that dress, or, hey, honey, yeah, that steak cooked really well, right? And it's a lie on its face, but just because there was deception doesn't mean the person was trying to be deceitful. Now, there is a difference there. Now, we find that the profession with the highest number of liars is teachers. And we have on the most recorded lies in all of history, we found that it was the US President Richard Nixon, who researchers had found that in one day's time, in a single day, he lied 837 times. Now, that's quite a lot. What we look at, everybody lies, right? So let's get that down as a foundation. We all do it. Now, does it mean that it's being deceitful? Is our deception deceitful? No, not all the time. Sometimes, yes. What types of lies do we have, right? We have a direct lie, a falsification. We also have types of lies that are, hey, they're withholding information. So maybe I'm just not telling you everything I know, but that still in itself is a form of deception. So what happens when we lie? What happens to the body? How can a human being with no instrumentation whatsoever detect that lie? Well, there's a psychological response. There's signs of stress. There's signs of deception as well that happens, physical things that happen to the body. Inside the brain, you can take thermoimaging and watch different sections light up when a person is telling a lie and being truthful. So there's all these reactions that happen with the body. Now you have to remember too, we're going to get into deception indicators and what that looks like. But one of those things that you need to remember as well is just because someone is showing an indication of deception, it could just be stress. So what you have is, just because you may pick up a tip or two, don't immediately go and confront someone and say, oh, I know that you're being deceitful here, you have to be lying, because that's why this training program is actually a very, very long multi-day course, because we cover all these different things. And here I've condensed it down for you in a time span of about an hour. Now we have to always remember that not all indicators of stress are indications of deception. And just really keep that in the forefront of your mind. And if you come back and you take one of our courses, then hey, you're going to learn a lot more about that. But guess what? I'm really excited to be able to share with you guys today a lot of really good techniques that you're going to be able to take out of this. Now, what happens when we lie, right? So we talked about how our body goes in and different things happen with our body, right? Well, our bodies deceive our words because it takes more energy for our brains to process a lie than it does to tell the truth. There's an old saying, truth will set you free. It's written on some buildings when you walk in there, and it's plaques on different walls and different buildings and different places. I know you guys have heard that one before. What happens when we tell these lies, right? Well, different things happen to our bodies. Gestures that go with when we tell a lie, the mannerisms of our body. Our body doesn't believe the words that are coming out of our mouth. So we fake gestures. And we'll get into what some of those look like. And the emotions in our face don't match the words that are coming out. We have micro expressions. We have leakage, and we'll get into what leakage means. our body reacts. We sweat, we create adrenaline happens, we create itching, like physical itching as well of our body. You know, one of the things that we're going to go into is the step back. And you see this a lot in politicians, and we'll cover this here a little bit later as well. It's that, and you'll notice this by watching some videos, and it's very slight. So once you learn these things, and you have to keep reiterating this knowledge over to yourself, and you put it into practice, and you're going to be able to pick these things out pretty easy. So when you're watching TV and you're listening to politicians talk, and a lot of them, what they'll do is they'll sit up, they'll be on their podium, they'll be talking, and then when they're done talking, they'll take a small step back. Now that's an indication of deception. It means that they didn't believe the words in the story that they just told, and they know that it's deceitful. And you're going to see that, and just different little things you'll pick up on, and we'll go into that and how that breaks down and what that means, and go over some examples of those. Now, I mentioned the word leakage. Now, we all can't control the tiny muscles in our faces when we lie. Those are called micro expressions. We cannot control our gestures, our voice, our word choice, our sweating, our increased heart rate, breathing. All of these things we do naturally. And then when we lie, it throws our body into a funk. And the greater the lie, the more we leak. We call these things deception indicators, DI. And we always leak the truth because we're not good liars. And here's the thing, like we just mentioned, the more severe the lie, the greater the leak, which means the more gestures, the more things that when you're trained how to do, you're going to be able to be picked up on. And we talked about these DIs, these deception indicators. Well, here are a few. Emobolic gestures. Now that's a really, really big one. And we're going to go into the science behind that one here. These others I listed because they are very real body reactions. But main one that we are going to focus on here is the embolic gestures. Incongruent gestures and expressions, freeze-flight gestures, comforting gestures like feet, convincing, heightened emotions. These are all different deception indicators. And there's a scoring method in which you can go in, and each of these would have an assigned number. And this is based off of years and thousands of different interviews and techniques that have done in both the private sector and different intelligence agencies where this was formed. This technique was formed to be able to score the deception. Now, why is that important? Unlike any of the other methods that are out there, being able to score the deception is extremely important, because you can not only look at the severity of the lie, but being able to see how many times and how many other gestures, when you combine them together, have taken place. It's going to paint a lot bigger picture, and it's going to give you an answer that no other method can do. It's going to give you the why. Why was that person being deceptive? And we're going to go into that, and I'm very happy to be able to present this to you. So we look at non-deceptive physical behavior, right? Because before we can begin to even learn the physical deception indicators, we need to discover what it means to not be deceptive. What are those behaviors that are not really deceptive? When we look at that, right? Relaxed and comfortable, no really signs of stress, head tilted slightly, steeple or pyramid gestures. And we're going to get into what exactly a lot of these mean. Now, there's always different meanings that are attached to it, and we're going to get into that as well. But there is a baseline that comes out of this, and being able to identify the non-deceptive physical behaviors is going to be key for when you learn what the actual deceptive behaviors look like. Now, you have to take everything into context, and we're limited on time here to about an hour, so I can't go in and fully break down that 5-hour course or that 4 to 5 day course for you to go into every single one of these aspects and how they mean like we can in the real course. But I think I've done a good job here being able to go into this slide for you. And we're going to touch base on a lot of these and dive down in. And I know you guys have a lot of questions on these, and hopefully we get them all answered for you. Now, lack of comfort gestures like rubbing hands, grooming, body parts being open, person's not closed in, they're sitting back, they're relaxed, they're chill, head turned slightly. And what we mean by steeple is this right here. Now, what we have with that is the hand steeple, as we can see. Now, this is also done by those who want to show leadership and strength. So it's not necessarily a non-deceptive behavior, because this is done as a way of showing confidence. But typically for people who are not leaders, who are not trained in any form of counterintelligence CI or ways of deception, this is pretty much a tall tale sign that someone's telling the truth, that they're very convinced that what they're saying is accurate. Now, I do have to note that professionals are taught to use and be deceptive by using non-deceptive physical behaviors. Well, what does that mean? That's a lot of words. Well, it means when we went with that list that we had just showed you of the non-deceptive physical behaviors, well, professionals, if you have to come across them in your career and you're questioning them, they're trained to mimic these behaviors, to make them seem truthful, to make them seem believable. But the interesting point about this is when now we go into what the actual deceptive behaviors are, you're going to be able to see that the body has ways of showing you the lie, even when the words don't match. We need to also talk about, before we get into what those deception indicators are, what it means for anyone to be questioned, right? Because what do? We exude stress, right? In order to detect deception, we have to compare it to the subject's actual behavior after they answered in irrelevant and controlled questions. And we compare that when we ask them a relevant question. And we'll get, that's a lot of technical terms, and we're actually going to touch on those and what that means and give you some examples. And at the end of this, I prepared a couple of sentences and where we can go into, and I believe that you guys are going to be able to detect what part of these statements are not factual. Now, we have to look at it, right? Because remember what I said before, that just because someone's being deceptive doesn't mean they're being deceitful. And that also goes true that deception indicators could also be indicators of stress. And it doesn't mean that they're being deceitful. It just could mean that they're stressed. But that's why we have questioning. That's why we develop a baseline. That's why we compare the questions that we ask somebody to the way they answer it when we set them up for failure, the irrelevant and control questions. And we can compare their behavior and the leakage in which their body performs. So, and we talked about how when somebody shows these deceptive behaviors, right? And well, it's not just one, right? So somebody could go in and they can have multiple different forms of leakage. So when that happens, you're going to see multiple different types, multiple different compounding things that they're doing. Whether it's middle finger leakage, whether it's touching the nose, covering their mouth, small micro expressions that their face does. In an interview, if somebody grabs something and sits a bottle in front of you, those are ways of avoidance, ways of telling deception as well. And so what we have here, and those are called, what happens when people do that, that's called clustering. Now, as we talked about the emobolic gestures, these are common gestures that have a universal understanding within your culture. And what does that mean? Well, everything that's true here in, say, the United States, within a culture, within a people, may not be true, say, in Africa or Asia or Europe. So what happens is there are common gestures, and this is really where you can take this training and look at it in any culture as long as you understand the culture. It's not static to one part of the earth or one culture. Now, so these universal understandings within a culture, such as shaking head, up or down, showing agreement. Well, when a gesture is given, even very slightly, it's referred to what we just talked about, a micro gesture, right? These micro expressions. And there are indicators of deception that acts contrary to what the person is saying. Now, the emblematic gestures are the only indicator, right? The physical indicators that are 90% accurate as being deception. There's multiple different case studies out on this, and in one of those case studies, there were 311 cases of people using emblematic gestures. All but in one of those cases, they were able to determine that the person lied when using an emblematic gesture. That means that the emblematic gestures are 99.997% accurate. Now, how did they know that those people were actually lying? Well, after the study, they went back or after the interviews, correction, they went back and they were able to determine by a later admission or confession. Now, this was usually done after a polygraph examination that helped confirm the deception as well. So after they questioned all these people, after the interviews, they went back and they did a polygraph and found out that the people were lying. Now, during these interviews, they've also found out that these people, in all but one of the cases, used an emblematic gesture. And this is what we're going to get into here in the next slides. What exactly are these? How can we detect them? Because it seems pretty important, right? If 90% of the time they're accurate, well, what's that look like? So we have the most used emblematic gestures, right? Half or small shoulder shrugs. They show disagreement, inconsistent head nodding. So that's if a person is telling you a story and they're saying yes, but then their head is shaking no while their mouth is saying yes. Well, that's their body not believing the words that are coming out of their mouth. Covering of eyes, rubbing of eyes. Now, like I said before, in the longer courses, the 4 to 5 day course, we get in and really break down what all these mean. Now, this is just one of emblematic gestures are just one of 9 different reactions that the body has, the physical reactions. And so really breaking down how this happens with you utilizing your control and in your specific wording and within your questioning is going to be key for you. And the reason behind that is, as we stated before, just because someone is being deceptive doesn't mean they're being deceitful. And these signs could be signs that you're seeing of stress. And we rule that out when we learn how to ask relevant questions and control questions, and we compare what a person has said during those times to what a person is saying now. And you're going to learn something very interesting, is that though everybody lies, the way in which, and everybody lies differently, right? So people between you, me, everybody we know, everybody will tell a lie differently. But the types of lies that we tell, the way in which we tell them, they're consistent. And we're going to get more into that. So we have an example of touching the mouth, right? This means they don't believe what is being said, or what the subject just said isn't true. Now, what happens is after the words that are spoken, we talked about earlier how it takes the brain power to get in there and process the lie. It takes more brain power to process the lie because you actually have to think about it. You're processing more brain power, which is why we can see it on the thermal imaging than it does to just tell the truth. It doesn't take that much brain power to tell the truth because we already know what's being said. We already know what was done. We're just recalling. We're not inventing new things. But this can also be an attempt to self-hush or not want to talk about the truth. And we see that very much on. And you guys, when you see these gestures, you can start being cognizant when you're talking to people of them making these, covering the mouth, and which usually happens right after a statement was made. Now, what we have here is an example of touching the nose. Now, this is going to be a video, so if you guys have, if your sound's up too loud, just be cognizant. I'm going to go ahead and start this video for you.
Will you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury?
I swear.
Now, what we saw there in that video, this guy was just sworn in under oath on a testimony. And we saw the example of him touching the nose, which means that he is already cognizant that he's going to be hiding the truth. And this was later found out that he did. He perjured himself. But it's just small gestures like that, which you're going to be able to go through, and they're going to be more visible to you now that you understand, now that they've been approached to you and you can understand, to keep an eye out for them. And this is just isn't used if you're a lawyer, this is, or a professional or an interviewer. This is used in your everyday life and in people that you meet. Now, what we also have here is, everybody lies, right? And one of those examples on those deception indicators was what's called middle finger leakage. Now, there's a reason that this happened, and this is an extremely common thing, and you probably never even noticed it, and I guarantee you've seen it plenty of times on TV. And it happens so quick, most people don't even catch it, they don't even notice it. And this is due to a rush of adrenaline, which starts an itch on a face. Now remember, we talked about how the body has these reactions when we tell lies. Well, one of those is adrenaline goes through, right? And the adrenaline goes up, and it's very small. I mean, it's very quick, it's like that. Most people don't even see it, they don't pay attention to it, but it happens that quick. And they instinctively bring up the middle finger to scratch the itch. Now, where we see this most is in politicians. And now I know that when you guys go back and watch the news, you're going to be looking out for this. And when you're looking out for this, you're going to see it. It happens all the time, and it's very, very common among politicians. Now, what do we have with, and we kept talking about this human expression, right? The ways in which the body shows us things. Well, how do we communicate as humans? We do it in two different forms of expression. We do it in word expression, which includes both verbal and written. The way that we talk are auditory, and the way that we write, those are both forms of word expression. The other one, which we just went over, is physical expression. Different things that that our bodies do. Hey, we give each other hugs. Some people, talk with their hands. They move them around. We have body positions. What does that mean, right? So now we're going to talk a little bit more about getting into the actual wording and the speech that people use, because words have meaning. Earlier here, we talked about comparing different things, right? So we would take the wording that somebody uses or the gestures that they had, and we would compare it. Well, now we're going to get more into that. And I know that this is a lot of information here that's being thrown at you guys in a very, very short amount of time. So we can hold all questions to the end. I'm happy to answer whatever questions you guys have. And I'm just very honored to be able to teach you guys a little bit of this. Now with the comparison method, this was created and modeled after applications of statement analysis and polygraph testing. Now, what happens is a subject's behavior, right, which includes their speech, it is compared to changes in their body language as a result of threatening, which are relevant questions, right? So threatening questions, what exactly does that mean? We call also professional term is the relevant questions. We're going to go into how people will answer differently based upon the type of question and the setting in which they're being asked. So the statement or word analysis is the method of detecting deception. You look at the words, you analyze them, what people use and what they say and what they don't say as well in certain circumstances and or settings. Now, most people subconsciously, right, their bodies will act on their own without the mind knowing. They try to distance themselves from a lie, and we talked about that. We talked about that with leakage. when the body has a physical expression to not believing the words that are coming out of a person's mouth and what they're trying to communicate. The way they communicate verbally to distance themselves from a lie is observable, and it's very easy to detect. When a person is asked a direct question that requires a yes or no response, it's a common for a deceptive response to be in the form of an indirect answer to the question. Now, this is something you guys are going to see a lot of, and now you're going to be able to pick it up, and your world will never be the same once you understand this. So let me break that down, what that means. You asked a direct question, yes or no, and the person gave an indirect answer to that question, meaning they couldn't answer yes or no. They went off with a story. What does that look like? Did you eat the cookies? An indirect answer to that question would usually indicate deception. Here are some examples to that question. I'm not interested in eating those cookies. So the question was, did you eat the cookies? That's a yes or no answer. Person could respond, I'm not interested in eating those cookies. Or, I don't know who ate the cookies. Well, I didn't ask you if you knew who ate the cookies. I didn't ask you if you were interested in eating the cookies. I asked you yes or no, did you eat the cookie? And they gave an indirect answer to a direct question. And that in itself is a form of deception. Now remember, I have to reiterate, just because someone is being deceptive doesn't mean they're being deceitful. We also have a scoring method, and I touched on that briefly for you earlier. The scoring method is usually used in conjunction with the comparison method of going back and looking at wording for relevant, non-relevant, and threatening questions. So we use that scoring method to accurately detect, hey, how probable and how high ranking is that deception that that person gave. And what happens is we combine all of those reactions, the physical and the word that these people are using. We combine all those deceptions together based on the scoring, and we can go back and say, if we need to write a report, we can say in that report, well, you know, what we don't say is we don't give a score number. That's for you. But say if a person scored something to where it was, they scored a total of 37. Now, anything above a 10 is deceitful. Well, we can say, and you combine them to get a higher number. So you can look at the type of deception and how regularly it was. And then it also lets you know, hey, a person was being more deceitful when asked this question than they were asking another question. So that can lead you back to ask them more questions on top of that. So what we know is we learn that the scoring depends on the deception indicator. As we saw that long list of the emblematic gestures, the emblematic gestures are usually scored as a 9. And we had the deception indicators prior to that, where emblematic gestures was on the top, and all the other ones, now this is just physical, were on the bottom. Well, they went down in numbers during those times. And in the 4 to 5 day course, we have a much larger training set where we break down what that all means. And so now we go into when a person is telling the truth. Both expressions are consistent and reflect the same message. That means that their words and their body are saying the same thing. Now, when a person is lying or being deceptive, the expressions are usually not consistent. For example, a person might say, and we talked about this earlier, a person might say yes while shaking their head no. And you have to really be cognizant of looking for that. You know, if a person's saying yes, what's their head doing there? Is it shaking no? Well, that's a sign of deception. And remember, we talked about 2 forms of expression, and to accurately detect deception, and if you're conducting an interview, you as the interviewer must assess both areas of the language expression. So you can score properly the word expression and the physical expression. And we talked about this at the very beginning of the slide, and I'm really happy to get into this point again. People lie differently, but individuals tend to be consistent in the way that they lie, right? As we talked about earlier, everybody lies differently, but they have a habitual process, which means they lie the same way each time they lie. So for example, a subject can be asked if he or she has ever disappointed his or her parents. Right? That's called a non-threatening question. Of course, everyone has disappointed their parents at some point or the next. But we ask these non-threatening questions to begin to get a baseline on how a person will answer. So we ask a question we know that the person's going to tell the truth to. So then at that point, we can judge how their body reacts when they're telling the truth. And we can also judge when they tell a lie, how their body will react. And we can start seeing the physical and verbal that comes with that. So what we have is, and in this example, a non-threatening control question. Did you ever disappoint your parents? Person answers no. Well, expression. That's a physical expression. And move his shoulder slightly to the rear, and you'll see that. And we talked about that in the embodied gestures. The shoulder shrug. Now, it's a very quick thing. And what we do when we have interviews with individuals is we record the interview. And then after we have the interview, we go back and we watch it. And that's when we start picking out all of these anabolic gestures and these different forms of physical expression. But what that looks like, that small shoulder shrug, it's just a small little shoulder shrug like that. It's hardly noticeable. Now I'll go very slow in order to mimic it. So when and the reaction happens typically after the person speaks. Person says, have you ever disappointed your parents? No. And it just goes up and back down. Now I did that very slow and very purposeful. But as I stated earlier, you're going to be able to see it. It's going to be very fast. That's why we want to record interviews when we have them with people so we can go back and watch them. Now, that person, as we talked about, everyone tends to lie consistently, right, in the way that they lie. So you can see that again. So we ask another non-threatening control question. Are you always honest? Yes, of course. Well, we know that's a lie because everybody lies, right? So we see again that the person moved their shoulder slightly to the rear. And then later in the conversation, now that's after the person has returned to their normal sitting position. Now, why is that important? Because after you ask non-threatening questions, you get into relevant or threatening questions. And what happens there is the person becomes uncomfortable. So you want to then get them back and bring them back down into a sense of comfortability. You want to make them more pleasant, make a joke. You want to bond with the person, but never bond when you're doing an interview with somebody with deceit or a lie. And that's very important. And as you can see in this example, did you ever have a problem with the police? No. And he's going to move his shoulder slightly to the rear and grip the arms of the chair with both hands. And why is that important? We talked about the combination and combining of gestures. And you're going to start seeing that. You're going to start being able to pick those apart. In example one, one person might consistently rub their elbow too as well when lying. Another person may move their shoulders. Therefore, as an example, it's inaccurate to say that all people look up to the right or the left with their eyes. I know that was a thing that some people had put out for many years. It just turns out it's completely false. It's been scientifically proven repeatedly throughout the past 40 years that 98% of people will look at you straight in the eye when lying to you. And let me say that again. 98% of people will look at you straight in the eye when lying to you. What they can't do is they can't control their physical gestures, and they cannot control the micro expressions. So what happens? During a threatening relevant question, we saw that a subject resorted to the same way in that previous example of expressing their deception. Now, here's the interesting part. because the gravity of the lie, right? So the question of the lie, how much power was behind it? How much trouble would the person get in for lying? That's very important. And we're going to get into that. We saw that this deception expression was compounded by another deception expression, as in gripping the side of the chairs along with the shoulder jerk. Now, when we have that comparison, when a person is telling the truth, both expressions are consistent, and we had talked about that. And we talked about the leakage, what happens when the subconscious takes over, right? And the person is telling a lie, because that's very, very important. The leakage of truth can be subtle and extremely obvious depending on the gravity of the lie and the subject's perception as to how the lie would negatively impact them. And we're going to touch on that right now, because that is extremely important. Because when you go in, remember, the subject, both expressions are consistent when they're telling the truth, the verbal and the physical. Lies create internal stress and leakage appears. Remember, leakage is the physical and expression that we can see through gestures and micro expressions. Now, we talked about the impact that a lie can have and how people will lie differently based off of what would happen, those consequences, right? Now, here's an example of what that looks like. The consequences one would expect if caught lying impacts the amount of deceptive expression. The same lie told to different people will have different consequences if that person was caught lying. Depending on the level of consequences, the amount of deception expressions change. So based on the gravity, the level of consequences of that lie being told, the leakage will be greater if the consequences are greater. So there'll be more things that you can spot and look out for. For instance, the lie, I have never used drugs. Told to an acquaintance, a friend of that person. What's the consequences if that person was caught lying? Well, it's pretty low, right? You have slight leakage in one of the expressions. Now, that same lie, I have never used drugs, told to a court judge, the consequences are extremely high. And you'll have a huge psychological response and leakage in one or both of the expressions. So the normal ways, the consistent ways in which that person tends to lie, you're going to see more of those expressions coming out, because the consequences of lying to a judge are a lot more severe than lying to an acquaintance. And I know we mentioned irrelevant, control, and relevant questions. And now we're going to dive into a little bit of what that means. An irrelevant question is just, hey, what did you eat for breakfast? And what are we doing when we ask these relevant questions, right? Those are questions that we're going to ask somebody to assess their response. So we can ask, normal, non-lying, or we can ask normal, regular questions, everyday questions that the person doesn't feel threatened by, to judge what they look like when they're telling the truth. Non-threatening control questions are questions that the interviewer, we already know the answer to. So if the subject lies, we can tell what those expressions look like when they lie. For example, we talked about, did you ever disappoint your parents? Did you ever think about stealing something? In your last job, did you always work as hard as you could? Now, those are general questions, and the answer to them, we all know those answers. Did you ever disappoint your parents? Yes, everybody does. Did you ever think about stealing something? Yes, everyone has. Doesn't mean you did it. It means you thought about it at one point or the next in your life. It's something that is universal. In your last job, did you always work as hard as you could? You ask these questions because typically a person who's going to be deceitful is going to lie during them. So with these non-threatening control questions, you can watch their body language and the consistency and start to determine the consistency in the way that they lie. And a relevant question is a very threatening question to that person, which means it could reveal something that's negative or incriminating about that subject. You know, have you ever used illegal drugs? And here we go again, the irrelevant question, right? It doesn't matter, but we're judging based off of how they respond to that. Irrelevant question should provoke a truthful response. What'd you eat for breakfast? Non-threatening control questions, that should produce a lie, a deception, and then we're going to be on the lookout for how your body reacts. Then we ask the relevant questions, the questions that are the meat and potatoes of it all, the things at the heart of the matter that we want to get the answers to. Do you ever use illegal drugs? Have you ever killed anybody? And then you compare their response to the way they answered the lie and the way they answered the truth. And you look for these gestures, you look for the way that they answered the control or relevant questions, and you compare it to the way they answered the threatening and relevant questions. Now, I told you we were going to have a little real life example of the written analysis. Now, this is going to be fun. Would you please tell me everything you did on the day of the incident? And this was an actual case. The guy says, yeah, sure. I got in the car, I drove to the store, I'm leaving the store, the gentleman comes and asks for a cigarette, then he shows me a knife, makes me give him the money. There was a call to the police and the whole story was told to them. Now the individual appeared truthful about driving to the store, but the subject revealed deception indicators when he described the robbery. And it's probable that whatever happened to the money, if anything, it happened before he got in his car to drive to the store. In addition, he's withholding information about when the police were called and how much information he told to the police, as evidenced by the two phrases without pronouns or proper names of the one doing the action, and with a passive sentence structure. Lack of pronouns in a passive sentence is a common way people use to distance themselves from a lie. Now, what does all that mean? Because that's a lot of wording. Well, here we break it down for you. The statement below reflects how the total score was calculated. He didn't completely answer the question about everything that he did on the day of the incident. He switched to present tense when telling a story what happened next, which is one of the most reliable proven indicators of deception. And he didn't just do it once. He switched between present and past tense 5 different times. He had improper use of articles. The knife, as he should have said a knife when it was first introduced. In the second instance, he used an article, the, when he referred to money, the money, as opposed to identifying whose money he was referring to, his money, the store's money. And he did that multiple times, twice. And he used wrong terms. He said, a gentleman, when he described the robber. Now, that's not the way that we would refer to a person who just committed a robbery on us. Would we call them a gentleman? And he used lack of time references when giving his historical account. He didn't say at 12:45 p.m. I went here, at 1:30 this happened. He didn't have any amount of time. And in the last sentence, there were no proper nouns or proper names of basically the one who was doing something within a passive sentence structure. Now, you total all those together and it equals 47, which is high. There's therefore a probability that it's a true story, that the true story is more serious than just lying to the police about a fictitious robbery. That the truth in the story is not there, but you can go in and dig even further down into this. Why did it happen? Which part did show the highest level of score on deception? So you can really break down a person's story by going through the grammatical structure and finding out which parts you should go back and reference to. Now, we talked about people's lies to control questions, right? And these are some typical lies that people tell. I never lie. My mother taught me to tell the truth. I would never do that. Lying is below me. I have never lied. I would never lie. I would never do such a thing. Here's one that people start out with in the sentence. To be honest, or to be perfectly frank, or you should believe me. All those statements are very common statements of deception. We talked about word expression, and we're going to go into this. And it's, if I was in anguish to see him ruin his life, it seemed that everything he did turned out to be a horrible experience. Even his relationships with a woman were torturous for his soul. Now, this question was asked to a subject, how would you describe your ex-boyfriend? This was her response. I was in anguish to see him ruin his life. It seemed that everything he did turned out to be a horrible experience. Even his relationships with women were torturous for his soul. Now, what do we take out of that? Well, that's called negative emotion words, and there are a lot of them in there. And that in itself is a form of deception. Another sentence. I started off a day at the gym. I was there from about 8 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Then I went outside, I noticed an old man. He approached me, and I think I'm seeing a gun in his waist. He went into the gym, and I went on my way. Now, what's wrong with this sentence that a subject told? Well, a bunch of different things, but the biggest thing is the past to present tense. He switches between past to present tense, and as we talked about just in the previous slide, that is an indicator of deception. Another one, when I got home, knew something was wrong because the stove was on. There were 2 cups of coffee on our kitchen table, yet no one was around. Called out to see if anyone was home, walked into the garage and outside. Next, I went next door to see if my family was there. And what is that called? That's lack of pronouns and specific names in a person's sentence, which is also an indicator of deception. Now, there's more deception identifiers in these sentences, but I'm focusing on the main ones. And like I said, we don't have the time, because we're limited in time, to really hone down and go over all the very specifics. So this is a broad overview. One more on here. After I woke up, I hung around the house for a long time, and then I went to the store. Afterwards, I rode my bike, and then I sat in the park. The next thing I knew, I was eating at a restaurant. Shortly thereafter, I went home. Now, this is called a text bridge. The text bridges are very, very important, and they are a heavy, heavy indicator of deception. He's using his wording to bridge timelines and events together without any clear understanding of how it truly happened. It's called a text bridge. And when you go through the course, or whether it's ours or somebody else's, and you're going to learn about those. Now, word expression. Questions when you ask somebody, right? You ask somebody a direct question, and they say, "Who, me? Where are you getting this information? Where did you hear that?" Well, that's an example of someone who's stalling. Somebody who says, "I would never do that," or "I did not stab that man." Well, that's lack of contractions. And this is an important part, especially for when English is your primary language. When we look at that, I would never do that. I did not stab that man. Now, in regular talk, people don't talk like that. That is a sentence that is orchestrated as a deception. The normal way, if somebody didn't do that, they would say, "I wouldn't do that. I didn't stab the man." Contractions. Didn't instead of did not. Where did not is a form of deception, and didn't, the contraction, is more honest in that sentence. Did you ever have an argument with Betty? Answer. As I already mentioned, Betty and I are very mature. Classy women would never argue. Now, we talked about this one already. That's an indirect answer to a direct question. Now, we go in and there's many other methods that are out there, and this brings us to almost to the close. This is just one method with a human lie detection. There are many others, good ones that are out there, industry standards like READ. The body language assessment and scoring technique is an advanced method, and it's one that has a very, very good foundation and is being deployed and used all over. But as we talked about, all these different methods, whether it's micro expressions, word analysis, they're done without machines. Other ones that are done are polygraph examination, statement analysis, traditional body language assessment, microfacial body language assessment, those micro expressions we talked about, and voice stress analysis. Now, before we can really understand why the human lie detection is so effective, we have to look at the other methods and their limitations. Polygraph, for instance, it monitors sweating, heart rate, and breathing. It's extremely accurate, and it's the best method to detect yes or no answers to specific questions. Now, let me say that again. The best method to detect deception of yes or no answers to specific questions. Now, it takes a lot of experience and training to get through it, and it can't always distinguish deception from other stress-related psychological responses. And an old saying where I come from is that polygraph is only as good as the examiner who's giving the test. Now, there are really great people out there who give great polygraph examinations, and I've had the honor and privilege of meeting a lot of them. So definitely, you know, the credentials of that person are very important. And again, these are other methods that are out there. Statement analysis, very accurate. Detects deception as well as other clues about how a person truly feels about a subject or event. We talk about traditional body language assessment. It's accurate when the interviewer is properly trained. And we just talked about that. It's only as good as the person who's giving a test. And that's true in a lot of things, right? The investigation is only as good as the investigator, right? You're only ever as good as your last case. Microfacial body language assessment, right? These micro expressions, and it's very, very accurate. There's a deep, deep science behind it. On voice stress analysis. Now, voice stress analysis, it's not very accurate. There's a lot of articles you can go and scientific studies on that. That go to that. The Guardian came out with a very good paper on it in 2019. The National Institute of Justice declared that voice stress analysis is only 15% accurate in their findings when it was when lies were told about drug use in field testing. Now remember, everybody lies, and just because someone is being deceptive doesn't mean they're being deceitful. And I wanted to thank everyone for allowing me to share this knowledge with you. Here's my contact information. And now I'll pass this back over to Alexi. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It was fantastic. And really, you can see by my micro expression that it is true. Really interesting, and I can see that all people, they stayed until the end, so I'm really happy and that you will be able to make the certificates.
Absolutely.
And, I can tell you that we have quite a number of questions and people who would like to also speak up and ask you something. It was really interesting, and I really feel myself like a TV host according to the number of people. Fantastic. So let's start with the very first question. Let me see. So the very first question was from Marcus Tan from Singapore. It was 1 a.m. at his time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I know it's early there.
Yeah, or late.
Or late, either way you want to look at it.
All right, here we go. So Lothar Müller is asking if the slides of the presentation will be available. So I told him that the recording of the webinar will be available. As to concern the slides, Stephen?
Well, the recording of the webinar will be available. You know, typically on this, I haven't thought about whether or not I'm going to release the slides. A lot of that is proprietary information, but if you want to go ahead and send me an email, we can discuss that.
Sure, thanks. While I'm searching for the next question, Stephen, can you tell me what are the best questions for the job interview? Because as I understand, we have many business owners here today with us, including ourselves. So when there's a person in front of you, you can see his CV is perfect. He's a master by writing CVs, and what's the best way to approach him using this technique that you told me and you told the presentation about different types of questions, how to like get more information out of him?
Right. So one of the things that you can do is if you already know about the person who's coming in, you already have a CV in front of you before he gets there. There's ways and there's training, and there's training actually in this program on how to form your questions. What type of questions should you ask? We talked about those relevant, non-relevant, and threatening questions. And the good thing about this is once you're properly trained in it, you can go in and just really work those into your everyday talk and your everyday speech. And the person has no idea that they're actually being questioned. It's just regular talk. And what you can do is with these control questions, questions that you already know the answer to. You can see how their body reacts, those micro expressions, the way that if they're going to tell the truth. And you take the way on a truthful question, you know they're going to answer it truthfully. And you can ask them a question, one of these control questions to where you know they're going to lie, because it's a general statement that is used that most people will say because they want to look good in that situation. So you can ask them, and then you can judge those amabolic gestures and the other physical descriptions that they give. And that way, then you can, once you have that baseline, those questions that you can start off with very early, and there's usually typically about 10 between relevant, non-relevant, and threatening questions. You can get in, and then you go through his CV with him. Ask him those questions. Ask him to talk about his CV. And now you already have a baseline. You have a control on how he answers questions. You'll be able to tell already how he is going to answer these, if he's being honest or if he's being deceitful, and if he's showing deception. Then you go back through and you can just ask him questions about his CV while you're watching him and look for those responses. And that'll tell you on his accuracy and honesty.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. So the next question we have from James Black, and he would like to ask his question himself. So I'm now connecting. James, can you please unmute?
Hi, yes, thanks for the fascinating talk. And I just wanted to ask, does the Donald beat Richard Nixon when it comes to the most lies in one day?
You know, it was interesting. So there was Richard Nixon is recorded as the telling the most lies in every day. So what happened is they actually went back and looked at one of his speeches. As far as anybody else, I don't know any numbers or statistics on that. But it's really interesting what you can do. And I greatly appreciate the questions, James. But it's really interesting what you can do, right? Because now when you have this ability to be able to go in and find these deceptions that people are telling you, you're going to be more cognizant of it. So whether you're watching TV, whether you're talking to an individual, whether someone's giving you a statement, you're going to have the ability to go back through and say, hey, guess what? You know what? I need to dig more into this part of what he said, or I know this person's being deceitful. Let me word things this way. Let's go look over here. Thank you for the question, James.
Thank you for the answer.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
And the next question we have from Lothar Müller. For my opinion, gestures and further motions is an area for micro expressions of fear, a window of the soul. That's a good, difficult question.
Well, I appreciate that statement very much. Yeah, and as we talked about, you can word it as micro expressions being a window into the soul. Because one of the things that we talked about, and that's very keen there, very, very good statement. Because one of the things that we talked about was that the body doesn't agree with the lie, right? So what happens is we have these micro expressions that happen, and the micro expressions are the leakage that tell the truth. So in a way, you're absolutely correct. It is the inner part of that person's soul, their knowledge on whether or not they're being truthful or deceitful, as it comes out and is shown through micro expressions. Good question, good question.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Another one from Bernarda Scrabber. I'm sorry if I'm wrong with my pronunciation. I think it was when you were telling about all these gestures. The question is that scientifically proven?
Yes. So the way that was within this method that was done, it was done after conducting thousands of different interviews, criminal interviews, and this was done within the intelligence community. This method was developed, and it was scientifically done through these. So yes, the answer to your direct answer to your question, yes, it is scientific.
So you can use it also in the court. For example, you receive the report, you make analysis,
Right.
you provide the report, and it's used in the court, and it's accepted. Yeah.
Well, you know, I'm not a lawyer. I don't give legal advice, but I can tell you what I have seen through my own experience. When you're going in and if you give it by numbers, that's not the way to do it. What you do is you go in and you say, when the witness or when the witness or subject or suspect, whatever the case may be at the time, had said such and such statement, the witness then showed areas of deception by, and then you say what they did and why that is deception. And it's up to the judge and whether or not they want to allow something to be admitted into court. But that's the way in which you would word your report. And in the actual course, we go in to how you actually do a report using this.
Nice, interesting.
Great question, though. Very good question.
Yeah. Another one from Ronin Wright. I think I pronounced it correct. And let us connect him to our webinar. He would like to ask. Ronin, can you unmute, push the unmute button? Ronin?
I just saw in the text, he put in there that he doesn't have a mic, and was wondering if you could ask him my question.
Okay. Let me see. The question was about maths, and Ronin says that it was not 47, it was 52 if to calculate the score in a sample. So I told that maybe there was some discount at the point, so it's difficult to say.
Well, I don't have that slide right in front of me, but I'll go back and look at that and make sure that my math was correct. And if it wasn't, thank you.
Thanks. So a few more questions. Wow, really appreciate people are really interested in this and want to know more. What do you think about staring? What do you think about staring into the person's eyes and having her in front a few meters away?
Well, what you want to do, it's a good question. You know, I've actually been asked that before. Can you basically stare into a person's eyes and tell if they're being truthful? Now, as we discussed, you have to remember these gestures and also the micro expressions, they don't happen just in the eyes. They happen all over the body. So what you want to do is you want to be very cognizant of what's going on with that person. Hey, what kind of gestures, both physical and verbal, are they putting out, right? What's going on in the wording that they use? Being able to identify on the fly particular wording, how that can or cannot be deceptive. Being able to identify on the fly these micro expressions and or gestures that are being made, and being able to determine at that point, hey, do I think that that person's being deceptive to me or not?
That's a good one. So people ask about the next webinar on this topic. I think we'll consider that. Yeah. Seen the technique with the cartoon settings by lawyers. And the question from Matthew Spire. Have you seen these techniques work in a courtroom setting by lawyers, and how do you educate them on these techniques?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matthew. Now on this, yes, it does. I've given multiple classes that have had lawyers from law and different law firms in it, and they're great when they go to trial and then when they're questioning a witness on it, and especially for when they're doing the depositions before they even get to trial, being able to get in and find out, is that person being deceitful? And if so, what in their statements, where should they really hone down on? Where were they most deceitful in these statements? And then they can go back and revisit those questions. So excellent question. The answer is yes. Lawyers use this. And the response that we've gotten back from it has been very, very positive.
Nice. A good comment from Tamara Rabinold. She says, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. Seems like a classic statement of deception. That's a good point.
Well, yeah, it was. Thank you everybody for definitely with your questions. And in there, like we talked about with the leakage, we talked about certain things different politicians and everything do. So go through, get trained up. And you can definitely tell a lot more when you're watching TV now, different things you can be on the lookout for.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen. It was awesome, fantastic webinar. Really appreciate that. And thank you everybody for joining us. Stay tuned. There will be another webinar in the coming days, and you'll receive an email with that. The video of this webinar will be available in our Facebook group. So if you want to see that again, or if somebody missed some part of it, please make sure you're subscribed for our WAD Facebook group. And hope to see you all soon in Aruba. Thank you very much. Stephen, we'll speak soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, everybody. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thanks.